You know that one friend who always says, "I support you no matter what," but somehow disappears the minute you actually need help? Yeah, this is about him. He said he wanted success. He just didn't want to work for it. And when I offered him a job to save his broke Forex trading ramen for dinner life, he told me that waiting tables was beneath him. That's when I learned some people don't want a hand, they want a throne. But this story, it doesn't stop at delusion. It spirals into conditions, ultimatums, and a request so outrageous, I laughed before I realized he was serious. This is the story of how I almost let guilt, loyalty, and a shared college pizza trauma convince me to let my unemployed best friend move into my house, manage my restaurant, and insult my dignity. Let's rewind. Everyone has that story. The moment you realized someone close to you didn't really want to see you win. If you've got a story like that, funny, messy, jaw-dropping, we want to hear it. Submit yours anonymously through the pinned link in the comments. We'll bring the best ones to life. And here's the part that matters. For every 1,000 views this video gets, we're donating $1 to help people in tough situations get back on their feet, because no one should have to choose between dignity and dinner. So watch, share, and tell your truth. We'll take it from there. He hadn't worked in over a year. His savings were gone. His parents, both in their late 60s, were covering his rent, his bills, even the Uber rides he pretended he could afford. He called it a temporary setback, but every time I asked what he was doing to bounce back, the answer sounded more like a podcast pitch than a plan. He had a degree in computer science, never used it, said no one would give him a role that matched his vision. Meanwhile, he was posting motivational quotes from entrepreneurs who'd built empires by thinking big, as if hashtags were a strategy. So when I offered him a job at the restaurant I work at, it wasn't a handout, it was a way in. A respected place downtown, solid team, fair tips, decent hours. I even talked to my manager. They were willing to give him a real shot. I told him he could start the next day. He didn't even hesitate. "I can't be a server," he said. "That's a low job." He said it like he was allergic to the word, like working with his hands might stain his reputation. I reminded him that half the staff at my restaurant had college degrees, that we were serving $42 steaks and $18 cocktails, that one of our regulars was literally a state senator. He just shook his head. "It's not about the money," he said. "It's about how it looks." That was the moment I realized he didn't want to solve his problem. He just didn't want to look like he had one. There's a strange kind of pride that shows up when someone's backed into a corner. It doesn't roar, it whispers. It says, "You're better than this," even when this is the only way out. And if you listen to that voice long enough, you start confusing comfort with dignity. I've known people like that. People who'd rather stay broke than be seen working retail. People who turn down interviews because the company's logo isn't cool enough. People who think life owes them something just because they once turned in a group project by themselves. I used to think it was fear, but now I think it's something else. Some people aren't scared of falling. They're scared of being seen climbing. And when that kind of pride settles in, help starts looking like humiliation. I should have stopped there. Should have walked away and let him figure it out. But I didn't, because part of me still believed he just needed a push. That's when he said he'd reconsider, but only if I made him manager and let him move into my house. It got worse from there. "I deserve better than this." That's what he said, word for word, after turning down a full-time job offer from a place that would have paid his rent and tips alone. He deserved better. Not because he worked hard, not because he showed up, not because he had skills anyone needed. He just felt like he did. And that was enough for him. At first, I thought maybe he was just spiraling. We all hit low points. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe the job market was brutal. Maybe he needed someone to believe in him. But the more we talked, the more I realized it wasn't just a bad season, it was a mindset. He had this way of narrating his life like he was the underappreciated lead in a movie no one else had been cast in. Everything bad was temporary. Everything good was meant to be. Every rejection, their loss. Every opportunity, not aligned with his purpose. He didn't need a job, he needed a dramatic breakthrough, a plot twist, a viral moment, something to justify the years he'd spent doing nothing and calling it strategy. And I get it. We live in a world that rewards the loudest confidence, not the quietest effort. The algorithm doesn't care how many dishes you've washed, just how well you can brand your burnout. But there's a difference between dreaming big and being delusional. There's a difference between having vision and refusing to open your eyes. What scared me wasn't just that he was struggling, it was how much he blamed everyone else for it. He blamed the companies that didn't hire him, blamed his parents for not understanding him, blamed me for offering him something beneath him. He saw every ladder as an insult because it meant he'd have to start on the first rung. I used to think entitlement came from privilege, but now I think it can come from fear. Fear that if you actually try and fail, then the fantasy dies. So instead, you stay on the sidelines, convinced the world just isn't ready for your greatness. He was 33, no job, no income, no plan. But the arrogance, that was thriving. And still, I kept the door open, because some part of me hoped he'd wake up. What I didn't realize is that people like that rarely wake up. They wait until you're tired. Then they ask to sleep in your bed. That's exactly what happened next. I thought he was joking. When he said he'd take the job, finally, I felt a strange mix of relief and pride. Like maybe all the pep talks, all the patience, all the giving a damn had finally made a dent. But then he added 2 conditions. He wanted to be hired as a manager, and he needed a place to stay, my place specifically. No resume, no restaurant experience, no leadership skills, but full managerial authority and a spare bedroom. He said it like he was ordering a sandwich, like it was totally normal to leapfrog past everyone else who'd worked their way up, because he was different. I have a natural leadership presence, he said. People just tend to follow me. I've seen people follow him, to the fridge when he grabs the last beer. That's about it. He said he'd bring vision to the team, said my manager clearly lacked innovation, said he could restructure the schedule for maximum efficiency. This from someone who hadn't been on time to brunch since 2018. And as for living with me, he called it a collaborative arrangement. I called it you eating all my groceries and leaving socks in the sink. But the way he pitched it was wild, like he was doing me a favor, like this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to combine our talents, his big picture thinking and my ability to survive on my own for more than 5 minutes. I couldn't even process it at first. My brain just stopped. What kind of person demands housing and management authority in the same breath as accepting a job they were never qualified for in the first place? It's the same kind of person who believes effort is optional, but recognition is guaranteed. That's the heart of entitlement. It's not just wanting more, it's believing you deserve more by default, even when you've shown no proof of capacity, effort, or intent. People like that don't ask how they can contribute, they ask where their nameplate will go. And if you say no, they'll tell you you're limiting their potential, that you never really supported them, that you're threatened by their greatness. Entitlement rewrites the story so they're always the victim of a system that somehow owes them success. It turns your kindness into an obligation, your boundaries into betrayal. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no fast enough either, because deep down, I still thought maybe I could help him. What I didn't know is that you can't mentor someone who thinks they're already the CEO. The way he said it, I can't be a waiter. That's a low job. You'd think I'd just invited him to mine coal with a spoon. But here's the thing he didn't understand, and honestly, most people don't. Serving isn't just carrying plates. It's reading people, managing chaos, selling without selling, and keeping calm while a man named Greg complains that his steak is too medium for the third time in a row. I've worked with servers who hold master's degrees, with bartenders who speak 3 languages, with hosts who could run a Fortune 500 if you handed them a clipboard in a crowd. And in cities like New York, you can clear $80,000 a year as a server, easy. No student loans, no office politics, no pretending you care about quarterly growth projections, just skill, speed, and the ability to charm someone while they send back a salad because the arugula is too aggressive. There's a TikTok I show people like him. It's this guy in Manhattan, mid-30s, charismatic, quick on his feet, filming a breakdown of one Saturday night shift. He serves a rooftop brunch, works a private dinner, flips a couple high-end tables. At the end of the video, he shows his tips, $1,147 in one night. And the comment section? Filled with people saying, "Wait, what am I doing with my life?" The truth is, calling a job low usually says more about the speaker than the job. Because what they're really saying is, I'm scared to start small. I'm scared of being seen trying. I don't know how to respect people who work hard unless they're wearing a tie. But there's no shame in honest work. The shame is in pretending you're too good for it while relying on people who show up to it every day. People love to romanticize struggle until it requires an apron. But there's a quiet power in doing what needs to be done, without a camera, without applause, just grit. He couldn't see that. All he saw was a title, a uniform, a tip jar, and somehow that felt beneath him. What he didn't see was that the people he looked down on were out-earning him, outworking him, and outgrowing him. And maybe that's what really scared him. But his fear wasn't done talking yet, because the next thing he did wasn't just entitled, it was manipulative. It involved a guilt trip, a staged emergency, and a suitcase on my front porch. At first, I thought I was being a good friend. I told myself I was offering a lifeline, that I was just trying to help someone who'd lost his way, that all he needed was a little nudge, a little structure, a little belief from someone who knew him before life got hard. But somewhere between him rejecting the job, then demanding to be manager, then dragging a suitcase to my apartment like it was already settled, I started asking a different question. Was I helping him, or was he helping himself to everything I worked for? Because here's the thing about people who are used to being rescued, they don't climb out of the hole. They decorate it and wait for you to come back with pillows. I kept replaying it in my head. All the times he called me loyal when I agreed with him, but judgmental when I asked him to take responsibility. All the times I spotted him meals, rides, phone bills, and told myself it was temporary. All the times I ignored the pit in my stomach because I didn't want to be the bad guy who gave up on a friend. But help, real help, isn't about guilt. It's not about stretching yourself then so someone else doesn't have to stretch at all. It's not about setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. It's about showing up once, twice, maybe even 3 times, but not pretending it's your job to carry someone who keeps letting go of their own weight. I realized I wasn't being generous. I was being convenient. I was the safe place he could fall without consequence. And deep down, he knew it. He knew I wouldn't say no. He knew I'd hesitate. He knew my silence was his leverage. It's a hard thing to admit that sometimes what we call helping is really just avoiding confrontation. That sometimes the person we're trying to save is the one slowly sinking us. He wasn't asking for help. He was asking for a pass, and I was the only one handing them out. But the next time he knocked, I didn't answer. Because eventually, even the most loyal friend has to ask, am I being kind or just being kept? And that question changes everything. It took me a while to see it. Because when someone's been in your life long enough, when you've shared dorm rooms, bad breakups, late-night Uber rides, you don't exactly stop and calculate the balance sheet of the friendship. You just keep giving. But somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't in a friendship. I was in a contract I never signed, where I gave time, money, empathy, and second chances, and got guilt, silence, or sarcasm in return. He didn't ask how I was doing. He asked if I could spot him. He didn't celebrate my wins. He just wondered why I didn't bring him with me. He never said thank you, just, "You're a real one," like that counted as rent. And every time I started to pull away, he'd say something like, "Not everyone has what you have," as if my stability was a personal insult. Unequal friendships don't always start toxic. They start slowly, with you covering a dinner here, a ride there, overlooking one flake, then another. But over time, you start to feel it, the shift. The way your phone lights up only when they need something. The way their bad day takes up 2 hours of your night, but your bad day gets a "damn, that sucks" and a 3-day silence. The emotional labor becomes constant. You're the therapist, the cheerleader, the safety net. And one day you look up, exhausted, and wonder why you feel so alone next to someone you've always been there for. It's not always about money. Sometimes it's about energy. And you realize you've been gifting someone your time, your brain space, your boundaries, without ever getting replenished. Helping isn't the problem. It's when helping becomes expected. When they start treating your support like a subscription instead of a choice. When your generosity becomes the foundation of their lifestyle. And if you say no, they call you selfish, say you've changed, say you're not ride or die like you used to be. But here's the truth. A real friendship doesn't make you feel smaller so someone else can feel secure. A real friend doesn't measure love in favors. And when the relationship starts to feel like a job you're not getting paid for, that's not friendship. That's a drain. And I was done being the faucet. I used to think helping someone out was the ultimate sign of friendship. Like, if you can't call your people when you're down bad, who can you call? But then I remembered something that happened a few years back, before all this. I had another friend, let's call him Malik. Malik and I weren't best friends, but we were close enough to hang out every week, send each other memes at 2 a.m., crash on each other's couch. He was funny, loyal in his own way, and always talked a big game about hustling hard. So when he got evicted, barely gave me any context, just said he had a rough month, I told him he could stay at my place for a bit. No questions asked. Just a blanket, a spare key, and a trust that we'd both treat it with respect. For the first week, it was fine. He helped with dishes, brought back takeout, even sent me money for utilities. By week 3, I was the only one paying for groceries. By week 5, he stopped pretending to look for an apartment. And by week 6, he was throwing parties at my place when I was working late. The worst part? When I asked him to start chipping in again, or at least set a date to move, he looked at me like I was the one being ungrateful. Said things like, "I thought we were boys," and, "Damn, I didn't know you were going to hold it over my head." Hold it over his head? I wasn't keeping score. I was bleeding. I was giving, and he was building a lifestyle on my generosity like it was a foundation he helped lay. And when I finally told him it was time to go, he left, took his stuff, took my blender, and blocked me on Instagram. That's when I realized some people only see you as a good friend as long as you're a good resource. The second you stop pouring into them, they disappear, like you stopped being useful. It's not friendship, it's access. And the price of keeping it is always paid by the one doing the giving. Looking back, it wasn't just about Malik. It was a pattern I kept walking into. One-sided friendships where the only real connection was my ability to solve someone else's mess. That story didn't make me bitter. It just made me better at listening to that voice inside, the one that whispers, You're not a bad person for closing a door someone keeps walking through without knocking. And with my current best friend, that voice was getting louder every day. It didn't hit me all at once. There wasn't some dramatic moment where he stood on a table and declared my job beneath him. It was quieter than that. Little comments, brushed off as jokes, smirks when I said I had to pick up a double shift, eye rolls when I mentioned a good night in tips. He never said, "You're less than me." He just made sure I felt it. Like when he asked if I ever felt stuck doing service work, or when he told someone at a party I was taking a break before finding a real job, or the time he said, "Man, if I ever had to wait tables, I'd just move to a new city and start over." The irony? He hadn't worked in over a year. I was paying my bills. He was explaining why his Venmo was maxed out. But in his eyes, I was the one settling. That's when I started noticing the red flag no one warns you about, the friend who doesn't respect the way you survive. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your path doesn't look like the fantasy they built for themselves. They don't ask what your job teaches you. They don't notice the way you manage chaos, read people, hustle under pressure. They just see an apron and assume failure. That's not friendship. That's silent judgment with a smile. There's something especially draining about being looked down on by someone you've carried, someone who's eaten your food, borrowed your Wi-Fi, crashed on your couch, but still thinks your work ethic is a flaw instead of a lifeline. And it taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. Respect is earned by showing up, not showing off. Anyone can talk big. It takes real grit to clock in when life feels small, to build something from scratch, to keep showing up, even when it's not glamorous. He couldn't see that, and honestly, he didn't want to. Because the moment he admitted my job had value, he'd have to face the fact that I'd been working while he was waiting, that I'd built something while he was busy building excuses. That truth, too heavy for someone who's only been lifting their own ego. And the more I saw it, the more I realized this wasn't about work, it was about worth. And he didn't know how to value mine without stepping on it. It didn't hit me all at once. There wasn't some dramatic moment where he stood on a table and declared my job beneath him. It was quieter than that. Little comments, brushed off as jokes, smirks when I said I had to pick up a double shift, eye rolls when I mentioned a good night in tips. He never said, "You're less than me." He just made sure I felt it. Like when he asked if I ever felt stuck doing service work, or when he told someone at a party I was taking a break before finding a real job, or the time he said, "Man, if I ever had to wait tables, I'd just move to a new city and start over." The irony? He hadn't worked in over a year. I was paying my bills. He was explaining why his Venmo was maxed out. But in his eyes, I was the one settling. That's when I started noticing the red flag no one warns you about, the friend who doesn't respect the way you survive. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your path doesn't look like the fantasy they built for themselves. They don't ask what your job teaches you. They don't notice the way you manage chaos, read people, hustle under pressure. They just see an apron and assume failure. That's not friendship. That's silent judgment with a smile. There's something especially draining about being looked down on by someone you've carried, someone who's eaten your food, borrowed your Wi-Fi, crashed on your couch, but still thinks your work ethic is a flaw instead of a lifeline. And it taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. Respect is earned by showing up, not showing off. Anyone can talk big. It takes real grit to clock in when life feels small, to build something from scratch, to keep showing up, even when it's not glamorous. He couldn't see that, and honestly, he didn't want to. Because the moment he admitted my job had value, he'd have to face the fact that I'd been working while he was waiting, that I'd built something while he was busy building excuses. That truth, too heavy for someone who's only been lifting their own ego. And the more I saw it, the more I realized this wasn't about work, it was about worth. and he didn't know how to value mine without stepping on it.